Well, good to see you all this evening, and want to start with a word of prayer, if we could. Do we have a volunteer that would like to pray for us? Oh, y'all don't fight over it. I mean, what? Okay.
Gracious God, thank you for this opportunity to come together to learn more about the Holy Land, to help us appreciate our trip that is coming up, to learn more about your people, about Jesus, and the land that He lived in, so that we may go and appreciate and appropriate the things that we learn, to come back and be closer to you and closer to living the life that you want us to. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Brian. So here we go with our homework report that Connie Beck did the research for us. This is the mosaic from the United States in the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth. So you remember Connie asked about what it looked like, and I sort of rudely said, well, that's a great homework assignment for you, which is, I thought about it later, that's a good way to just shut off all questions, which wasn't my intention. But Connie, thanks for finding that for us. It's very unusual, isn't it?
Well, it is, and as I was doing my homework, it was interesting to me. I don't know how many countries, you're going to tell me to go find that out, but I don't know how many countries made donations. But it was so interesting because all the pictures, of course, are online by country, and they tell, the website I looked at told me which part of the church they were in and so on. And they're all very bright and colorful, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see them. As I mentioned to you, most of them, if you looked at the mosaic, you might guess which country it was from and be right, because they seem to, have cultural aspects to them. But that one, that's what we did. That's the USA, right there.
Yeah, we were talking about that before the class, about most of them had cultural aspects. I thought, it'd be kind of, the Fort Worth mosaic would probably have a Western theme. We could see that, but how do you do one that captures all of the multiple cultures throughout the United States in one mosaic? So anyway, it is different. Okay, tonight we're going to visit several places. We're not going to read from the Bible very much tonight, because many of these places aren't places that are featured in the Bible, but they are important places in terms of understanding the culture and the land, and understanding the context in which Jesus and his disciples ministered. So we'll be visiting these sites that you see up on the screen this evening. And just to remind you, June 26th is the day that we're on now in terms of our journey, and we'll drive to see the Roman ruins at a place called Beit Shin, which was continuously inhabited for 5,000 years. It has another name, and that's Scythopolis. Scythopolis is the Greek name for this same city, and so it goes by both names. And you'll see it on the map as Beit Shin or Scythopolis. It's good to pause for just a moment and look at the map and kind of be reminded, where we've gone. We're at Scythopolis now. Scythopolis is part of the Decapolis, and Decapolis means 10 cities. And that's an important thing for us to pause just a minute, and we will read a passage of Scripture that kind of relates to the Decapolis because the Decapolis is the region of these 10 cities, and you see inside this box the 10 cities of Decapolis there. And the region called Decapolis is outlined by the dotted line. You can see it's just to the east, southeast of Galilee. And it involves, if you look at the Sea of Galilee, which is, of course, just on the eastern side of the region Galilee, on the east side of the Sea of Galilee is the region of the Decapolis. And so what we want to read is Matthew 8, beginning at the 28th verse. And as you're looking that up, let me give you a little background. All the time in the Gospels, you see Jesus saying, or telling his disciples to go over to the other side. Or he loads everybody in the boat and they go over to the other side. Over and over again, you see that phrase, the other side. That always is referring to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And who lives on the other side? Gentiles live on the other side. This is Gentile territory. All the cities of the Decapolis are Gentile cities. They are Greco-Roman culture cities. And this is important because Jesus was all the time taking the disciples over to a place that was not kosher. The people were very different. The customs were different, the way the cities were laid out. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. That was all different. And so he wanted the disciples, apparently, to rub shoulders with all of these folks that are very different. And we'll see in our text for this evening, it's an unclean place because they even herd pigs in the Decapolis. You don't have herds of swine in Galilee because that's Jewish territory, and those are Jewish villages. And pigs are not kosher. They're unclean animals. And so, you get a little hint of that in the text that we're about to read. So, Matthew 8, verses 28 through 34. Anybody ready to read? Okay, Brian? I think you were just volunteered.
When he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, two
Demoniacs.
gosh, I can't pronounce that. Two demoniacs coming out of the tombs met him. They were so fierce that no one could pass that way. Suddenly they shouted, "What have you to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now a large herd of swine was feeding at some distance from them. The demons begged him, "If you cast us out, send us into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and entered the swine, and suddenly the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the water. The swineherds ran off, and on going into the town, they told the whole story about what had happened to the demoniacs. Then the whole town came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to leave their neighborhood.
Okay. Jesus is a troublemaker, and he wants them out of the neighborhood. A herd of swine would be pretty expensive, I would guess. Sometimes, in some translations, and you'll have footnotes that will indicate this, you will see that it is called Gergesa or Gerasa, so it's the Gergesenes or the Gerasenes. And it depends on the ancient text that the translation is using because there's a textual variant there. And those are different places. And many scholars would place it at Gergesa just by the description where this happens. And certainly there's another story in the Gospels about a man who lives among the tombs, which is also an unclean place to be, among the tombs. And this is over on the other side, and this is in the region of Gergesa as well. So this is the kind of stuff that happens over on the other side. And this is a really different place. So it's an important place because Jesus is doing that. Jesus also takes the disciples through Samaria, which Jews would not normally travel through Samaria. So you see between Galilee and Judea is Samaria. And you remember that, and we'll actually read this text in a little bit, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And for the Samaritan to be a hero in a parable would be shocking, because Jews and Samaritans really hated each other. And Jews would travel, if you see where Judea is, they would go over to the east of Samaria and go up right along the Jordan, or even cross over the Jordan, and then come back over into Galilee to avoid that region normally. But Jesus took the disciples right up through Samaria when he met the woman at the well in that place. So, Scythopolis is one of the cities of the Decapolis, and Bet Shean, and it's spelled different ways. You see up at the top, Beth Shean. Sometimes it'll be SHE''AN. This is a map of what the region looks like. And I want to spend a little time talking about Scythopolis because it has features that every Greco-Roman city would have. And because those are important features of Greco-Roman life. Now, we're not going to talk about all the features in Scythopolis because we're going to be able to see those. But some things that they would have in common. This is what Scythopolis looks like. This is from the hill, or the tell, which means hill, that overlooks the city. And so in a city, just kind of take a look at that for a moment. You see the prominent street down the middle? That's called the Cardo. Every Roman city had a Cardo, which means heart. And that road that ran the heart of the city was always north-south. This is the Cardo, which was the prominent street with shops along the sides, covered porches, and a primary place for commerce, the Cardo. And you see those in all the Roman cities. Look up at the top of the hill. Here's another view of the Cardo. Do you see that lone tree at the top of the hill? Anybody recognize the tree? Here's a picture of the tree. That tree became famous because of Jesus Christ Superstar. It's featured in the movie, and it's a dead tree, and it is now supported. It has some iron supports that kind of hold the thing up because it's, I mean, look at that. It's the only thing up there. And it is like that tree on I-30, yeah, that gets decorated. Yeah. So you have the Cardo. You also have an amphitheater in every Roman city. And in the amphitheater, you would have obviously plays, drama. This is a theater that's been partially restored, and it's actually used as many of those theaters that have been restored are. You might remember the one at Caesarea Philippi that had, theater lights and everything because they have concerts and stuff there. And they do have presentations here as well. And down at the front there would have been brass, sort of brass vessels where you see the stages cut out like that. And so a sounding brass would have been there to amplify the sound. And so when Paul talks about a noisy gong, a clanging cymbal, or a sounding brass, or a clanging cymbal in 1 Corinthians 13, perhaps he is referring to that. Every Roman city also had Roman baths. And these are the baths at Scythopolis. And you see all of those round things that are kind of strange looking. And you wonder, well, how does that work? Well, I'm going to jump over just for a moment to Masada, so you can see what those round things did. Those were pillars that supported a floor, and the water would be heated under the floor. And so you can see how they have restored part of that, so you can see how it works. 2 layers on the floor like that. They've done a restoration to show what the walls were like in this Roman bath, where there would be tiles that were vented. You can sort of tell that they're hollow. And so it was really a very sophisticated system of steam and heated water that would be heated and would flow through the baths. The Romans were amazing engineers, and their baths certainly illustrate that. And you can see these throughout the old Roman Empire. In England, you can also see the old Roman baths in the town of Bath, or Bath, as they would say. And then every Roman town would have had a lot of statues of gods and prominent figures. But Scythopolis really doesn't have very many of those that survived, or none that survived with any detail. But Caesarea by the Sea does, and these are some that are, of course they didn't survive fully intact, but these are some at Caesarea by the Sea. And some of these are quite large. Many of them are simply life-size, and you would find these in every Roman city. Also, every Roman city would have a hippodrome. Again, this is the one in Caesarea by the Sea. This is for chariot racing, horse racing, and every Roman city would have that. Every Roman city would have a Colosseum. This is the Colosseum at Beit Shean. And this is where, of course, people fought to the death. The gladiators would fight to the death. Slaves would be forced to fight to the death for the entertainment of the crowds. And every Roman city, again, would have this. Every Roman city would also have a forum. And this is a place where people would gather. They would discuss things. It's also a religious site. It's also a place for commerce as well, around the Forum. And this is the Forum in Scythopolis. So Scythopolis, Beit Shean, is a great place to see what a Roman city was like, and some fascinating features that we will see that I didn't put pictures of, like the public toilets. And I'll just save that for y'all to experience that. It's pretty interesting. Not a lot of privacy. Any questions or comments about Greco-Roman cities? Okay, we go to Zippori, and also Zippori has another name. It's also known as Sepphoris. So from Beit Shean, we will go to Zippori. This is not far from Nazareth. I mentioned this, I think, in passing earlier, that it was a center of learning during the time of Jesus. It was a significant city, and it was a Hellenized Jewish city. So while it was a Jewish city, it was very much influenced by Hellenistic culture. And we'll see that as I'll show you a few pictures of that. It's an amazing site as well. This is where it's located. You can see its proximity to Nazareth. This is the Cardo at Zippori, and again, some more of the city. The most prominent thing in Zippori are the amazing mosaics. This is one of the structures is called Nile House, a wealthy residence, and it has these amazing. I mean, just look at the detail in these. Even though it is damaged, of course, through the years, you can see this amazing detail Again, another portion of the mosaic there. The most famous one, though, and perhaps the most famous mosaic throughout, well, there's one more before we get to that. This is a zodiac wheel in one of the residences there. Again, that's very interesting. If you think about a Jewish town, a Jewish city, you wouldn't expect this kind of thing there. And yet it is a Hellenized Jewish city, so it has many of the features of a Greco-Roman city, and it was really more of a secular place. This is the most famous mosaic. She is called the Mona Lisa of the Galilee, and it's in a residence there. It's in the dining room, the floor of the dining room of the residence. This is kind of up close. And it's amazing through these tiles what kind of texture and detail that they can get. And you can see why she's called the Mona Lisa of the Galilee. What's significant about Zippori is its proximity to Nazareth. And most scholars would agree that Jesus was influenced by Zippori in that he and his father would have gone there to work. Craftsmen were drawn to Zippori from all over the place to do all of this construction, to do these amazing things, and they certainly would have gone there to find work, and therefore he would have been exposed to this city culture and this Hellenized culture that certainly he would not have gotten in Nazareth. You remember what we said about Nazareth being podunk, a small, tiny little village. And this is a center of culture and Hellenized culture and learning right there in Galilee. So it would have influenced Jesus. He would have been more comfortable in terms of navigating the a very large city in its day. And we'll enjoy that. That's a really neat place. We go then at the end of the day on June 26th. We end the day with a service at the Jordan River. And this is the place where we'll be. It says traditional site. This is really not the traditional site of Jesus' baptism. This is a dedicated site to remember the baptism and for people to experience the Jordan River. It's near where the where the Sea of Galilee empties into the Jordan River. And so it is cleaner there than other parts of the Jordan. And this is a site for tourists built there to experience the Jordan River. So what we'll do there is we'll have a service remembering our baptism. As United Methodists, we believe there's one baptism, so we don't rebaptize people. So I just want to make sure everyone understands we're not going to be baptizing anybody unless you've never been baptized and then you want to be baptized. But we will have a time for remembering our baptism at that place and for being able to experience wading in the Jordan at this spot. The spot is, well, let's talk about baptism sites, and then you can see where that one is. You see where it says baptism possible site? This is about halfway down from the Sea of Galilee to the bottom of the slide. That's one possible site, one traditional site. The one that has the most consensus is way down, not very far north of the Dead Sea, and that's because it's because of what we're about to read. And when we read this text about Jesus' baptism from Mark 1, then you'll hear some key words, and then we'll talk about that. Mark 1, verse 1.
The beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. As it is written in the prophet Isaiah, "See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way. The voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight." John the Baptizer appeared in the wilderness, proclaiming a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. And people from the whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem were going out to him and were baptized by him in the river Jordan, confessing their sins. Now John was clothed with camel's hair, with a leather belt around his waist, and he ate locusts and wild honey. He proclaimed, "The one who is more powerful than I is coming after me. I am not worthy to stoop down and untie the thong of his sandals. I have baptized you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit." In those days Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness.
Thank you. So, do you hear that? That John is in the wilderness, and he is preaching in the wilderness. People are going out to be baptized by John in the wilderness. And after Jesus' baptism, the Spirit drives him into the wilderness. And we'll talk about the wilderness a little later, but this is in the wilderness. Farther north is not in the wilderness of Judea, and certainly up right by the Sea of Galilee is not in the wilderness. And so the site, the traditional site, the more likely site, is somewhere down north of the Dead Sea, not too far really from Jericho. And so that it places it in the wilderness of Judea. But it's at the place that we will be, this place, up near the Sea of Galilee, that we will remember the baptism, and we will be in the Jordan River also. This is our remembrance of baptism service at the river. When we were there in 2000. Then on June 27th, we will travel along the Jordan Valley on our way down to Masada. And the Jordan Valley is very beautiful. I'll just show you a few pictures from the Jordan Valley. Very lush. This is farther down in the south. You can begin to see it gets rocky and begins to change a little bit. So we come down to Masada. And again, Masada is not a site that we find in the Bible at all, but it's an important site in the history of the land and the history of the people. This is where Masada is located, down on the Dead Sea, overlooking the Dead Sea. This is a model that shows you something about about what it looked like. This is a kind of reconstruction based on the archaeological site at Masada. Masada means fortress, and it's so that's why it bears this name. It was a fortress built on cliffs, and it's up on a high plateau. And you can see that those cliffs on the east side of Masada are about 1,300 feet high, and on the west are about 300 feet high. So they're up to the, there are some natural approaches, and then there are some ramps that I'll talk about in a minute that were built by the Romans when they had it under siege in the 70s AD. It's flat. It's the top is about 1,800 feet by 900 feet in size. And there was a wall around the top of the plateau that was 4,300 feet long, 12 feet high. It had a lot of towers. It was quite a fortress. You can imagine a fortress built like this would be very, very difficult to overcome. And it included storehouses, barracks, armory. It had a palace and cisterns that were filled by rainwater. And you can go down in one of those cisterns, and it's huge. It's enormous. And it had 3 narrow winding paths that led up from below. And when you got to the top on those winding paths, there were fortified gates there. It was built by Herod the Great. Herod the Great was paranoid, to say the least. He was cruel. He killed his favorite wife and 12 of his 15 sons. And that prompted Caesar Augustus to say, better to be one of Herod's pigs than one of his sons. And almost all the historical information we have about Masada comes from Josephus, the first century historian. And we know that Masada was one of the fortresses that Herod built. Herod was a huge builder, and he built a number of fortresses. It may well be that Herod never even spent one night at Masada. As elaborate as this was, and well stocked, and armed with soldiers and all of that. But he was so paranoid that he moved from place to place. He built all of these fortresses, he was ruthless. He obviously didn't mind killing anyone to fulfill his ambitions. I'm having difficulty here because my pointer has gone away and I cannot scroll down in my notes. Yeah, it's not showing up on mine. So, oh, that's very frustrating.
There it is. Look at the screen. See it?
Yeah, I see it, but it's in some sort of mode and I can't scroll down on my notes. That's my frustration here, which is, this is very frustrating. Yes, there are no restrooms up on Masada. It's an important thing for you to know. And if you've got to go, it is a long way down. If you decide to walk. However, you do have options. There is a cable car that will take you from the bottom up to the top. And we took the cable car up, but I decided we would walk down. I ended up running down about as fast as I could go. You'll be glad to know I made it. And thank you, Susan, for bringing that story up. Oh, yeah, and of course my family's at the top laughing and pointing at me and shooting video of me running down.
But you can see, you can watch it,
Yeah, on the snake path running down.
Boy, that's fast.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're motivated. This is a view from Masada. You can see the Dead Sea in the background. Do you see the square down there? Or not a square, it's a rectangle. Let's take a little closer look at one of these. It's not the same one, but there are a number of these. These are the ruins of Roman encampments around the base. when Masada was under siege, by the way, Masada was taken over through stealth by the Sicarii. Sicarii means dagger bearers. And these are terrorists. These, in fact, really, these are kind of the first terrorists. They were committed Jews who wanted to overthrow the Roman occupying forces. And so they carried daggers. That's how they got their name. They carried daggers, folded in their cloaks. And they would get in a crowd where there was a Roman official or there was someone they considered to be a Jewish collaborator with the Romans, and they would pull their dagger out and stab the person, stick the dagger back in, act horrified like everyone else was acting, and so they would attack at night and so forth. So they were terrorists, and they took the fortress over. And if you remember the miniseries, any of you remember the miniseries Masada? I'm gonna see if I can find that to watch before we go this time, because I've sort of forgotten. There was like a 5-part television miniseries back in the late 70s, maybe 1980 or 81, but something like that. And that told the whole story. What happened was the Romans laid siege to Masada. They built these encampments around. They surrounded Masada. They built through slave labor. By the way, this is in the midst of a Jewish uprising that led to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. This is right after that. They're in Masada. These zealots, they were also called, and there's really no way the Romans can get to them. I mean, Masada really is you just can't conquer it. And so they built a siege ramp using slave labor, if you can imagine, to get up to Masada. And then they wheeled a device up there that was like a big tower with what's the word I'm thinking of? A ram. Battering ram, thank you. And so they literally battered the wall until they knocked it down, and then they took over. But by the time they did that, they all committed suicide. And so there were over 900 men, women, children who had a kind of suicide murder pact, if you will, because they had a way of. It was almost like Jonestown, I mean, in a sense. And they all committed suicide rather than be captured by the Romans. Part of the reason the Roman effort was successful was they were using slave labor, Jews that they had captured in the rebellion, to build the ramp and to put the machine into place. And because of that, the zealots up in the stronghold stopped throwing rocks, stopped attacking them, because they didn't want to. They were not willing to attack fellow Jews, knowing that ultimately it would cost them their lives. It's quite a story, and so this is one of the sacred places, if you will, in Israel. One of the places where military people are inducted into the military in ceremonies because of the resistance to Rome, and they celebrate the bravery of those people at Masada. There's another one in the Golan Heights called Gamala, which was another zealot stronghold. That is also a place where it's kind of a sacred military place. And then, of course, there's the Western Wall, which is another in Jerusalem. Okay, this is, I've already shown you that from Masada, the Roman bath. This is the view, another view of the Dead Sea from Masada. And this is, believe me, the best way to get up and down Masada, and it's money well spent. This is a little map of Masada, and I know you can't really see, I'm sure, all of that detail, but you can see it was pretty elaborate, and especially if you look over on the north side, which is to the left, you can see Herod's palace there. And it was very elaborate, throne room and all. And then there are cisterns and dwellings and places for storing arms and administration buildings and bathhouse and all sorts of facilities up there. It's really remarkable how they were able to capture the rainwater, how they were able to make all of this function 1,300 feet up. I mean, if you think about what that took, without any kind of mechanical pumps or anything like that, it is remarkable what they were able to do. There's the mini-series, by the way. Yeah, Peter O'Toole. I think he died this last year, didn't he?
Was there an aqueduct still in there somewhere?
Well, they may have had to carry water brief distances up there, but they really had to, in the cisterns, there are stairs that go down, and they had to go down and draw the water up. But for the bathhouse system and all that, they would have had ways to channel the water, to heat the water.
Says they have a swimming pool.
Yeah, swimming pool, which is amazing if you think about that. I mean, the work that it took for laborers, probably a number of them slaves, to make this thing operate for the Romans was pretty astounding. Okay, we then, it says, by the way, that we will drive along the Dead Sea, but I inquired, and we will be able to take a swim in the Dead Sea, which is good. I mean, it's just, we don't want to just drive by it. I mean, you've got to go in it. So, what'd you say?
Got to jump in if you're there.
Got to. So, we'll have the chance to experience that. Yeah. So, just a reminder, you've seen these slides before. The Dead Sea really is quite beautiful in its own way. The water is, just a reminder, 32% salinity. You just float on top of it, basically. I love that picture of the guy reading the newspaper. The Jordan Times, by the way. And, just lots of salt. We will pass by the springs of Ein Gedi on our way to Qumran. Ein Gedi is there north of Masada. Ein Gedi is an oasis, and it is not far from Masada and Qumran. And the name means kid spring, that is, kid as in young goat. So it's the spring of the young goat, or kid spring. It has a long history. It was a Jewish town. It was an important source of balsam for the Greco-Roman world until it was destroyed by the Byzantine emperor Justinian as one of those many persecutions of the Jews throughout history, but in the Byzantine period. And so there is a mosaic there in the ancient synagogue that's really interesting because it says in that there's an Aramaic inscription that says that is a warning against revealing the town's secret, which is kind of intriguing. Most think that the secret was probably the methods for extracting and preparing the balsam resin, so it was probably a trade secret, basically. for that, although it doesn't say what the secret was. But it was, in its day, a wealthy town, made wealthy because of the production of this balsam resin. And then we go to Qumran, a very interesting and important site. Qumran is the site of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, as you probably know. They were discovered 1947 to 1956, during that period. Once a shepherd boy accidentally discovered them when he threw a rock and he heard a clay jar break. After that, many excavations ultimately uncovered almost 900 scrolls. They were written, most of them on parchment, some were written on papyrus. And so in Qumran, you have a community that scholars really disagree, especially in the last few years, over exactly what this community was. Traditionally, that is, traditional scholarship has always said it was home to the Jewish sect Essenes, and they had there a library, obviously a library. They hid these scrolls in caves as during the uprising against Rome, to save and protect the scrolls. And you can see labeled on here the kinds of facilities you find at Qumran. You have a kiln for making pottery, 900 clay jars of scrolls there. You have a cistern to catch water, very important for this semi-arid area. You have an assembly and dining hall. You have a bath. You have what scholars have believed to be a scriptorium. This is a place where someone would read a text and a room full of people, members of the community, would write what was read. You know, that's the way texts were copied and transmitted in antiquity. You had an aqueduct that you can see running across on the upper right-hand side, a cistern that dates from the period, perhaps, of the first temple, so a much older cistern there, a tower, and then a bath. That's interesting because it has a cracked staircase from an earthquake. This is an earthquake-prone region, and throughout history has had some significant earthquakes. And you will see in the ruins, damage from various earthquakes. The Essenes were kind of a monastic group. They were ascetic. They lived very simple lives. They were devoted to scholarship and to being holy. They saw this contrast between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. They were very dualistic in their understanding. And we know that from some of the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls. There is a cemetery, a large cemetery on the east side of the site. Most of the graves contain the remains of males, although there are a few females discovered. And some of those burials could be from medieval times. So very few were excavated because it's against the law to disturb a grave in Israel. But they estimate over 1,000 bodies are buried there, most of them males. And so they believe from, again, it's more evidence that the Essene community, a monastic community, lived there in the first century. And leading up to the first century. What's significant about the Dead Sea Scrolls is that they are the oldest. Those aren't caves. I don't know why that says caves. It says that because I wrote that for some reason. I probably copied it from another thing. This is the visitor center, that little oasis-looking area up there is the visitors center at Qumran, and in the foreground, in front of that. Those trees, you can see the ruins of the Qumran community there. And here you can see some of the caves in which the scrolls were discovered at Qumran. This is the most famous of the caves. This is called cave number 4. And actually, it's not a natural cave. It's an artificial cave. It was cut into the cliff. And several hundred scrolls were found in this cave. This particular cave was opened up by someone, a Bedouin, who was searching for scrolls. And it's very significant because of the number of scrolls that it contained. And it was dug for that purpose. It was a library. It was a safe place to keep these documents. This is a fragment of one of the scrolls. Most of them are in this kind of, well, the best ones really are in this kind of shape. They're very delicate, and it's taken a long time to translate those. Some still remain sort of closely guarded, and there's a lot of controversy about access to all the scrolls, and it's been that way for 60 years. The texts are mostly scriptural. Hebrew Bible texts, again, these are the earliest fragments we have, so they're very interesting in that they predate any of the earliest, the oldest manuscripts that we had prior to the discovery. And then there are also non-biblical manuscripts, and those are fascinating because they show that people had a much wider diversity of thought and opinion and ideas religiously than scholars had previously thought. And they already thought it was pretty diverse with the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the Herodians and the Zealots and all of the groups, but even more diverse than that. And they're written in Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Nabatean. And the Nabateans are the ones, by the way, who built Petra. And that was actually a great civilization at one time, great merchant civilization. And as I said, mostly on parchment, some on papyrus, and some even on bronze. And the manuscripts date from as early as 408 BC. The latest, actually, that they found are much later, 318, so, long after the uprising against Rome. So the community was doing that work for a very long time. This is a well-preserved section of the scroll. And this one, the Hebrew has been printed down below it in this particular slide for those of you who want to read the Hebrew. Right to left, remember. And then this is a view of the Dead Sea from a cave at Qumran, one of the caves where some of the scrolls were discovered. Fascinating place. Okay, Judean wilderness. We will, after we visit Qumran, then we'll finish the day driving up through the Judean wilderness on our way to Jerusalem. We'll have dinner in Jerusalem, and we will spend that night in Jerusalem as well. This is the Judean wilderness. It is really, it's a chalk desert, and it's very empty and inhospitable. This is ruins of a sheepfold in the wilderness, that round circle. Because even in that wilderness, it doesn't look like it's possible, but shepherds graze their sheep there. And in the rainy period of the year, when there's some greenery on some of the slopes, there is actually something for the sheep to eat. There are trails. You can barely see them. If you look above the sheepfold, you see those horizontal lines that go back and forth across. those are trails. And, you think about the 23rd Psalm, he leads me in right paths. The work of the shepherd to lead the sheep in a way through the wilderness, wherever they're grazing, in a way that's safe. The shepherd has the shepherd's crook to rescue a sheep that wanders off and maybe goes over an edge and gets stuck someplace. So you can imagine the work of shepherds. And you see them today. You see flocks of sheep, even in the wilderness of Judea. When we think about the wilderness of Judea, you can see how empty it is and how rough and difficult it is. We have to think of the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. I don't know what image that you've had, if you've not been to the wilderness of Judea or seen the pictures that you may have had, maybe growing up, of when it says he was alone in the wilderness and for 40 days. What that wilderness would have been like. For me, as being from East Texas, for me the wilderness, was like a pine thicket, kind of, with brush and all of that kind of stuff. But it's quite different than that. It really is a desert and very lonely, very desolate. So Matthew 4, beginning at verse 4, we'll go through verse 11, is Matthew's version of the temptation, or the testing is probably a better translation, the testing of Jesus in the wilderness. Now remember, this is right after the baptism, and it says the Spirit led Jesus up into the wilderness, or drove Jesus into the wilderness, depending on which gospel you're reading. Okay. Anybody ready to read verse 4 through 11, verses 4 through 11? 4, Matthew 4. Mm-hmm.
But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God."
Oh, sorry, verse 1.
Okay. Then Jesus
I was looking at the chapter number at the beginning of verse 1, sorry.
Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city. How far did you want me to go?
Keep going.
Okay. Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." After the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him.
Thank you. If you were looking at that slide while she was reading, you can imagine stones into loaves of bread. You can imagine the high place as you see in the background. Imagine how famished after 40 days. This translation, the Common English Bible, says he was starving, and he would be. And so all these temptations are temptations in the sense that they are testing him to see, for him to get straight about what his mission is and what he is about. And so it's, why don't you imagine if you were able to make these stones become bread, the power you would have, or throw yourself down from the pinnacle of the temple and, just a big show, God will save you from that, and that would be amazing. Imagine the power you would have. Or I'll give you all of this kingdom if you'll bow down and worship me. It's the, sort of the pact with the devil we talk about. And he rejects all of that and is committed to what he is about. And so that's why it's called the time of testing, because he comes out of this then and immediately begins to preach. He immediately goes into Galilee, and there begins his public ministry. And by the way, Satan, the word Satan is actually a title. It means adversary. It's like a prosecuting attorney in a way. It is a person. What's that? Yeah. It has that the Satan. In fact, it's in Hebrew. For example, in Job, it's the Satan, and it's actually in the book of Job. This is part of the heavenly court, and his job is to be sort of the opponent, the one who tests Job. You remember? And so it's really strange in that, well, here he is sort of part of the heavenly court, and that's the role of the Satan. This is the embodiment of, this is the symbol of, if you will, not only evil, but the one who tests, and the one who tries, the one who tempts. And you remember last week, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, whenever we were at Caesarea Philippi, and Simon Peter says, no, you're not going to go to Jerusalem and be arrested and all of that. What are you talking about? And he says, what? Get behind me, Satan. Because not that Simon Peter is the devil. Simon Peter is functioning as that person that is testing him at that moment. He is embodying that kind of testing. So, wilderness of Judea, I think the most important thing there is not only John the Baptist living in the wilderness and preaching and teaching, but also Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, found in all three of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. This is another scene of the wilderness. You can just see how empty and inhospitable it is. But there in the wilderness is a monastery. And there are several monasteries. This is the largest monastery. This is called Marsaba. It's in the Kidron Valley, which is a long valley that runs down through the wilderness of Judea from Jerusalem. The Kidron Valley, when you get up to Jerusalem, is where the Garden of Gethsemane is, and it is the path from Bethany to Jerusalem, a path that Jesus took many times, and the entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. The same valley, but a very different place in the valley, up by Jerusalem. By the way, you always go up to Jerusalem, and it's not a north-south kind of thing. It's an elevation thing. Jerusalem is a high place, and so wherever you are, you go up to Jerusalem. And certainly from the Dead Sea to Jerusalem, you've got a lot of elevation change there as you go up. The monastery houses only 20 monks. That's quite a compound, isn't it? Complex for 20 monks. And it was founded in 483. And no women are allowed in the monastery. Men only. It is Greek Orthodox, yes. Greek Orthodox monastery. And it really is a beautiful place. You don't get to go there, really, but you can see it from the road from Jericho to Jerusalem. This is the Kidron Valley up by Jerusalem. One other thing, while we're thinking about the wilderness, turn to Luke 10, beginning at verse 25. We'll read through 27. This is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And we read this because Jesus says that the man was going down, notice it's down, from Jerusalem to Jericho. And Jericho is just north of the Dead Sea. It's a kind of oasis area. And Jericho was a lush, wealthy area in the first century. But to get there, you had to pass through the wilderness from Jerusalem to Jericho. And the wilderness was not just a lonely place and hospitable, but it was a dangerous place because robbers would be along the road, because the route from Jerusalem to Jericho was a major trade route, because Jericho was a center for agriculture, a center for trade, and the way to get from Jericho to Jerusalem was you had to go through the wilderness. So that gives you a little background to the parable. So somebody want to read verse 25 through 37?
Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Is that through 27?
Go through 37.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise."
Thank you. Do you see the road in the foreground on the slide? Imagine walking down that road by yourself through the wilderness of Judea and not knowing what's around the corner. And perhaps there are robbers there, as was often the case, waiting to rob you. Incidentally, before we completely leave the wilderness, this monastery is there. There are other monasteries, and from very early on, there were religious figures who became very famous, hermits, who would go off and live alone in the desert. These were known as the Desert Fathers. People would come out, bring them food, and seek wisdom from them. And so we have the writings of the Desert Fathers, the wisdom written down from them, that in which they're interpreting Scripture or they're explaining their own spiritual practices. They lived, as you can imagine, ascetic lives with nothing in the wilderness, but a little shelter, and whatever food they had, people brought out to them, the Desert Fathers. You remember we said on the first night that the 3 great monotheistic religions of the world that persist today all were born in the wilderness. They were born in the desert. That's not true of the fertile crescent. Those religions did not survive, did not persist. But there's something about the wilderness, about the desert, about the focus there, about the loneliness of the place, that enables a kind of spiritual depth, a kind of introspection that you're not going to get in the marketplace, or you're not going to get necessarily when life is easy. And so the Desert Fathers actually pursued that intentionally. Okay, so then we make our way to Jerusalem. And I just thought that was a really pretty shot of Jerusalem in the late afternoon, early evening. Okay, next week, this is where we'll visit, but I wanted to point out the bottom there, we're going to have a Skype conversation with Bev Robb next week. I had emailed and asked if she could do that, and I gave her 3 different dates, and next week was the only one that worked. So you'll have a chance. Bring your questions. If you think of any questions, write them down, jot them down. Bring any questions that you want to ask Bev. Bev owns the travel agency and also has led many tours over there. In fact, the reason she can't join us on the, the 16th, whatever that 19th, is that she will be in Israel, at that time. She may be there when we're there. I don't know if she'll connect with us or not. I'm not sure about that. But she may well be there. Anyway, she'll be available to us to talk, ask questions. And you may notice I jumped a little bit ahead on on the syllabus in order to make a little more room next week for that conversation with Bev. So we covered a little more tonight than we had planned to. If you can't be here next week and you want to email a question to me that you want to ask, then we can do that, and then you can watch the video and get your answer that way if you'd like. Okay, anything else before we go this evening? Yeah.
Is there any place that we're going to go where Susan might sing for us?
Sing? I don't know.
The answer is yes.
Excellent.
There will be opportunities.
I think that would be a great idea.
I do too.
A wonderful.
Embarrassed.
Oh, you shouldn't be. I mean, we love to hear you sing, and we think that would make it really special.
It would. Thank you for
Think
that.
about it.
Yeah, we will.
One of the churches.
Huh?
One of the churches.
A solo. That would be really special, I think, don't you?
So low we couldn't hear?
Huh?
So low that we couldn't hear her?
Well, that's what I would do.
I'm sure.
Great. Great idea, Connie. Anyone have anything else for us? Any comments, questions, insights? Well, thank you all, and we'll see you next week with your questions for Bev.